Hello, and welcome to Wendy's Workshop and part 3 of my art junk journal. If you missed the first 2 parts, just click on the link below and that'll take you to part 1. Make sure to watch to the very end of this video for photos that really show the detail. Let's finish up. I'm really excited for this video and to show you my finished journal. It came out exactly as I pictured it, and I believe that using the layered die cuts instead of embossing on the front cover really did give me that added dimension I was looking for. So here I've shown you my 5 signatures sewn onto a piece of fabric to create my book block. I will then be adhering this to the inside binding of my book cover using the same inexpensive PVA glue as I did in part 2. You can see that I'm really laying down a thick layer of glue because I want to make sure that when it dries, it cures the same way it did on the cover. I really am pleased with how well the fabric adhered to the book cover. Now you want to make sure, and I'm surprised that I actually remembered, that your pages are facing the correct direction. What I mean by that is, if you have any pages that are directionally specific, such as a sentiment or flowers that you don't want upside down, make sure the direction of your pages match the direction of the cover image. Once I did this, I went ahead and set the signatures into the binding, and you can see that I go over each area of the fabric along the outside edges and in between each signature with a bone folder to make sure the fabric is pressed down firmly. And while I cut out some of this footage, I did do this several times as the glue was setting up just to make sure that it was properly adhered. Once I was comfortable that the fabric wasn't going to pull away from the book cover, I brought in my jug of glue and my gesso to hold the signatures upright while the glue dries completely. And while this tested my patience to the very limit, I did let it dry for several hours before coming back and finishing. Now that my glue is dry, I'm going to take my very professional weights off, and I'm just going to check my binding to make sure that my signatures look like they're securely in place, and they do. So I'm going to go ahead and glue down those little flappy edges of fabric, and I hope there's no technical name for those because I don't know what it is. And I'm going to make sure that they are pressed down, but I'm not as concerned about waiting until those dry to move on to the next step because while they do provide some extra stability, they're not really crucial to the structure of the book itself. As I'm doing this, I realize that I need to trim just a bit from the top and bottom edges of the fabric for a clean look. Had I been thinking, I would have mitered all 4 corners of the fabric slightly before gluing the book block in. So if you're going to try this project yourself, I would definitely do that first instead of how I did it. Just trim from each of the corners in at a slight angle, and that will ensure that when you glue your end pages in, these little flaps won't stick out at all. And I would do this before you glue in your book block. So with my flappy edges trimmed up and glued down, I'm ready to add my end pages. The end pages are those papers that are glued directly to the inside of the covers. For this, I've decided to use 2 pieces of pattern cardstock that I cut from one 12x12 sheet of pattern paper. I chose the pattern because it has bits of the same blue tone that my cover has, as well as some fun metallic silver. So as you can see, I am coating the inside of the book cover generously with that Scholastic PVA glue so that the paper will adhere well to the fabric. Because the fabric is porous and sucks up so much of the glue, you have to put a pretty thick layer to get the best result. I will also go around the edges of the paper with glue just to make sure there will be no lifting. Once I've gotten my pages glued in, I'm going to grab my small brayer and go over everything just to make sure it's all pressed down with no bubbles. So while I'm finishing this up, I'm going to tell you that after it was all glued and ready to go, I decided I needed a little more color variation to that outside cover. I started by using my iCrafter blending brushes, and I'm going to put a link to those below, to add a deeper blue into the shadow areas. Because these are like small foam daubers, they can really get into the nooks and crannies in between the die cuts, but because they're brushes and not foam, they're not going to wear out and fall apart like the foam daubers do. And as an added bonus, you can wash them, which means you can use them with both your Distress and your Distress Oxide inks. So I did this, and when even that wasn't enough, I started layering a bit more. So I'm going to put on some music while I add a little paint and some distress markers and some silver to highlight the dimension even further. Okay, so now that the color is exactly what I want, it is time to add that tassel that I created in part 2. I used an old jewelry punch to put a hole in the binding, and then I added my removable tassel. And remember, the tassel has a jump ring and a lobster claw that I added in part 2. So what do you think? I really love the finished product and I'm dying to fill it up. At the time I edited this, I've already started on my first page and I can't wait to share it with you. Thanks again for joining me as I craft. If you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to see more, be sure to hit the like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.